You know his name. His name is Rip Van Winkle. But do you know his story? More than likely, especially if you're American or born in America, but even if you're not from America, you've heard the name, but you don't really know the story. You've never actually read the tale from Washington Irving. This is a collection of his complete tales. Today, we're going to discuss not only this story, where I'll explain the whole story, but a meaning behind it that personally I haven't really read or heard elsewhere. And I think it's a really missed opportunity about what's happening and the purpose of this story and how Irving helped to invent the uniquely American imagination at a time when America did not really have its own mythology. Every nation, every country, every culture has to have its own founding stories and the kind of stories that serve as household names. So one of the things that's interesting about Rip Van Winkle is it's a very common story of a man who goes to sleep and wakes up in a new world or a new change. But the difference about this one is really, really important. Irving actually takes this story from a German source, Peter Klaus the Goatherd, which we'll talk a little bit about. But all the elements, you'll see like all the elements are basically the same. But what he does different is critical and it's foundational. It's why we know Rip Van Winkle, but we don't know Peter Klaus. If you've played, like, for instance, Red Dead Redemption 2, John Marston talks about it.
Good day, fine people. Mr. Vanderland, Mr. Matthews, I presume. And who are you?
Rip Van Winkle.
Huh. Good day, sir. Agent Milton, Pinkerton Detective Agency.
You know, if you were like me, my parents loved the Twilight Zone, so we used to watch the Twilight Zone all the time. There was an episode called the Rip Van Winkle Caper, which is about gold thieves who put themselves in suspended animation for 100 years to escape the law. There's Looney Tunes. Elmer Fudd does a kind of Rip Van Winkle to the year 2000, and he wakes up to find Bugs as a grandpappy. Futurama, that's the whole setup of Futurama. Even the show Wishbone, a dog imagines himself as Rip, and he falls asleep for 20 years and recognizes nobody.
Lovely. Nothing like a good nap. The kind of nap old Rip Van Winkle used to take. Rip originated the power nap and remains the patron saint of slackers everywhere. Rip Van Winkle was written in 1819 by Washington Irving, one of America's first great authors.
So Rip Van Winkle is a dictionary common noun. It means a person oblivious to changes, especially in social attitudes, or just someone who sleeps a lot. That's a common way that it's used, is just someone who sleeps a lot. And so parents will sometimes nickname their daughter or son a Rip Van Winkle because like all you do is sleep. Also, interesting note, the Knickerbockers, the Knicks, the New York Knicks, are also named after the imaginative, the fictive author of the sketch Rip Van Winkle. And we'll talk a little bit about Diedrich Knickerbocker as well. If you'd like to explore this work and other works, short stories, poems, classic movies, canonical works of literature from Homer to Melville, I have my translation of the Iliad that we read. All these kinds of great works of literature. If you want to add some great literature at a really affordable cost, not just reading, but discussing with me and others, join the Literary Canon Club. It's very affordable. Go to troubadour.studio/literary canon club, troubadour.studio/literary canon club, and you can look at the current schedule, see if you'd like to sign up. I also do courses, and if you're a club member, you get discounts on those courses. So I do all kinds of things like that. Join the club. Also, this story, if you don't want to buy this whole book of Irving stories, you can read it online for free, Rip Van Winkle and the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. But I also put together anthologies now. So I have an anthology of all the short stories and poems we're going to be reading, which are all American focused. It is America 250 as I record this. So if you want to get that, right now it's not available for sale, but it is available for free to Literary Canon Club members. So go ahead and join that and you'll get the ebook of my anthology, beautifully designed, I think, with a good introduction by me for all the stuff, and you can join the club that way. Before we get into the story itself, I want to do a thought experiment. I think this is the core of why Irving might have even chosen this story. So imagine a 40-year-old man falling asleep in 2005, and he wakes up today or 2025 or whatever year you're watching this. So he's in his 60s now. Now he's still aged. The sleep did not spare him from that. So think about all the changes that has occurred from 2005 and 2025, right? That 20-year span alone. And for the person himself that this happened to, that went through a coma, let's say a 20-year coma, think about the personal losses. Family's gone, children's grown, his house that he lived in by strangers, the kind of feeling that you might have heard from your parents when you were younger of, in my day, this was all grass, right? And it's like, all right, Pops, thank God, got it. You're right. And then the avalanche of all the technological and social changes. I mean, there's been revolutionary movements in America and in the West, but just technology. I mean, in 2005, there was no iPhone. Really, social media hadn't started in a popular culture. There was no Obama, no Trump, no COVID. There was no 20 years of war in Afghanistan and then the embarrassing retreat. There's now a new war as I record this. Who knows what's going to happen in the future, but there was a new war with Iran. So this 20-year sleeping man would wake up to autonomous cars, to AI seemingly taking over the world and writing essays and all kinds of things and taking over jobs, data centers humming where there used to be fields. It's like you lie down in X world, you wake up in Y. That's the sleeper story. Now, this story was the core of what Irving took. It's an ancient old story, though. So let me give you a couple of popular examples of the sleeper tale and how it tends to be used. It tends to be used in a religious manner. Epimenides, the Cretan, he sleeps for a decade in a cave and wakes up as a prophet and a purifier. So the sleep kind of confers, it makes him holy. It's almost like the death and resurrection story in Christianity, where the death as a kind of sleep, he goes up to heaven, but then he comes back as a holier man, as a Messiah type character. The seven sleepers of Ephesus, these were early Christians who hid in a cave supposedly around 250 AD to escape persecution, and they awoke generations later to a Christian empire. So this is very similar to the Rip story in a sense, is that I think it's more aligned to sleep as a resurrection type thing, sleep and waking. And the legend is sacred enough, it actually appears in the Quran. So this Christian story appears in the Quran. Another story is Honai, the circle drawer. I don't know this one as much. I just know the basics, that he sleeps for 70 years. He wakes up and no one knows him. His learning is dismissed and he prays for death. It's a darker vision of this sleeper tale where all these things are negative for him. But this story is everywhere. The Chinese Ronka, the Japanese Urashami. It's a human universal is the point. It's all over the place. The specific tale that Washington Irving uses for his story is Peter Klaus the Goatherd. And this is published in about 1800, so 19 years probably before Irving. Peter Klaus the Goatherd is a kind of grim tale. So it's a folkloric story that's captured by a person. He goes by the pen name of Otmar, the writer. So here's the basic elements of the story of Peter Klaus the Goatherd, this good old goatherd. He's a goatherd from the village of Sittendorf. He's grazing his herd in the Kyffhauser mountain. He follows a stray goat, meets a silent man who beckons him to follow, and is led into a walled hollow where 12 solemn knights, not one of them are speaking. They're all silent, but they're playing nine pins, a form of bowling. Like, okay, they're having fun, right? He's made to kind of go and set up their pins for them. So he works for them. And then he works up the nerve, this Peter Klaus character, to drink from their vessel. He drinks again whenever he tires, and then eventually when he gets tired, he falls asleep. Then he wakes up. He walks home thinking it's the next morning and finds his house in ruins, occupied by strangers. All his goats, the goatherd, his goats are gone, until his grown daughter, now a mother, recognizes him, and he learns that 20 years have passed since he woke up in the morning. That one night to him was 20 years for everybody else. This is a German national folklore. It's critical to the feeling of being a German, and just like Charlemagne to the French and Arthur to the English, or Aeneas to the Romans. Here are the elements, the devices here: the silent bowlers, the magic drink, the 20-year sleep, the grown daughter who recognizes him. Irving took all of that. It's not about did Irving take that element from the story. From the Goatherd story, he absolutely did. The question is, what did he do different? Why is Rip Van Winkle known, but Peter the Goatherd not, at least not in America? Because the story spread in America, but it didn't have the American mythology. That's what America as a new country in 1819, remember they, fought this war in 1776 for several years, and they're still forming what it means to be an American as a unique entity, as a unique person. And that's what Irving really does. That's what's really important about this story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and other Irving stories. And there's a lot of other people who added to this, other literary writers that we can talk about in future videos, or come over to the Literary Canon Club and talk about it with us there. But what he does, Irving, is he takes this German story, this ancient story that's universal of the sleeper, and he buries it and kind of uses the American soil to create American myth. So Irving moves it to the Catskill Mountains, and he turns American history into myth. The silent bowlers in the Peter Klaus story become Henry Hudson and the crew of the Half Moon. The very discoverer of the river, the Hudson River, is cast as this magical figure who lures Rip into his story. A country with no ancient legends for its own, only inheriting legends from other places, whether that's the Native Americans. Many of the early American mythological stories are actually very combined with Native Indian, Native American stories. But this country with no legends of its own manufactured this type of story on purpose. One of the other fundamental differences between Rip Van Winkle and all the other sleeper stories, including Peter Klaus, is that Peter Klaus loses 20 personal years to a still village. His village is basically the same. Rip sleeps through the American Revolution. This is similar to the story of the seven sleepers of Ephesus, where they go to sleep under Roman or pagan rule and they wake up under a Christian nation or a Christian world. That's similar to this in a sense. So there is that similarity. But Rip lies down a subject of Richard III and wakes a citizen of the United States. And the village isn't just older. It's a new nation with a new spirit. They speak new types of words. They talk about voting. They have demagogues in the town square trying to get you to vote a certain way. Very different than when you're a subject of a country and you are just kind of debating or being angry about something they did, but you have no control or view over Parliament. You can just read about what they decide thousands of miles away. And, this is the decree of King George III. Now you have a say. And it's like, what is this? There's talk of Bunker Hill and all these events that happen. And Rip is like, what is going on? So the ancient sleep stories tend to be about revealing God or religion in some sort. But Irving's sleep really reveals the innate American change. That's the Americanization, the radical changes that occur in America. Rip is a kind of character that a lot of people, especially whether they're older or younger, can kind of associate with or fantasize about being. And this is another real invention. Mark Twain will kind of build on this some more with Huckleberry Finn and characters like that. But Peter Klaus is simply a plot function, I think. He's a goatherd who naps. But Rip is a person you actually like in the story. He's good-natured. He's gentle. The children of the village shout with joy when he comes. He's kind to a fault. He's first to help any neighbor with the toughest jobs. He works, but only at other people's business. So he's described as indolent, as lazy in his own family. And partly that's because of his henpeckedness. He's henpecked, which means his wife is a nag to him all the time. But he's harmless to her. He just wants to fish and help out his fellow man. He's not really a hero. He's not a villain. He's an everyman. He's somebody that if you're a young boy, a young teenager, you can this is how I'd like to be. If you're an old man, this is how I'd like to be. He doesn't represent that kind of hardworking middle class person. That's another story for another time. So an American boy can really imagine himself as a Rip. And in fact, American boys and girls sometimes are nicknamed Rip because they sleep so much, but they could be the likable, easygoing soul who'd rather fish a dry stream all day than chase some kind of status. Let's go through the story briefly. I want you to have an understanding of the story. Since Irving is trying to invent a new mythology, a story that we can all as Americans kind of associate with, he does something I think very important, which is he invents a historian. So the way that it opens up is this story is found among the papers of the late Diedrich Knickerbocker, an old gentleman of New York who was very curious in the Dutch history of the province and the manners of the descendants from its primitive settlers. So that he invents this kind of fake antiquity, footnotes and all, by the way, to vouch for a story that he made up, to kind of give it a historical precedent. This is a very common American. Other people do this as well, but this is very common in America. Then the setting, of course, as I said earlier, is very critical. This is a unique aspect to the storytelling, is it's not in Germany. He puts it in the Catskill Mountains, a branch of the great Appalachian family. Old, magical mountains on the edge of the known world. Civilization at the border of the wild. This becomes a really big part of the American persona and how America sits in the minds of Americans and the world. For 150 years, or at least until the late 1800s, this idea of a civilization on the borders of an untapped, savage, uncivilized world is a big part of the American consciousness. For better, for worse, accurate or not, doesn't matter. It's just a fact that this was a big part of how Americans viewed themselves and how the rest of the world saw Americans. And this will give rise later to the popular hero of the cowboy, which is a man who lives on the outskirts of civilization, right on the edge of an untamed savage land. Now, Rip Van Winkle is described as descended from the Van Winkles, quote, who figured so gallantly in the chivalrous days of Peter Stuyvesant and accompanied him to the siege of Fort Christina. So he comes from a line of great warriors, and Rip, quote, inherited but little of the martial character of his ancestors. So this hero of American literature opens up and he's kind of a falling off from this great warrior. He just wants to kind of rest and relax and enjoy his life rather than go out and fight for new things. As I said about his character, he's simple, good-natured man. He's a kind neighbor, obedient, henpecked husband. Those are all quotes from the book, from the story. His one great flaw, an insuperable aversion to all kinds of profitable labor, but not idle. Irving, or Diedrich Knickerbocker, goes on to say quickly afterwards. He'll fish a stream all day without a single nibble, haul any neighbor's burden for free, quote, ready to attend to anybody's business but his own. But as to doing family duty and keeping his farm in order, he found it impossible. His children, quote, as ragged and wild as if they belonged to nobody. Very Huck Finn, very Twainish. Then the escape in the story. So Dame Van Winkle nags him. He goes to the local inn, and the talk of King George are his refuge. There's a painting of King George on the wall. It says King George. The henpecked husband is a kind of comedic feel, which is very American. The kind of warmth and the humor themselves, a very Americanization of this, critical sleeper story. Then he goes into the mountains, his dog Wolf, his firelock, a day's hunting away from the wife. That's his rifle, his gun. The strange square-built man with a keg comes kind of up the mountain. There's a silent, solemn company at their 9 pins, just like in the Peter story. They and he hears their bowls rolling, quote, like distant peals of thunder through the hills. Hudson's ghostly crew. Then he drinks, he sleeps, he wakes. His gun is gone. In its place is an old rusted firelock, quote, an old firelock, the barrel encrusted with rust. Wolf has vanished. His beard has grown a whole foot. His joints are stiff, and he thinks it's just the next morning. He goes down to the village, which is larger, stranger. It's, quote, busy, bustling, disputatious. He then sees faces he doesn't know, houses he's never seen. He finds the old King George Inn, but it's now the Union Hotel, where the great shade tree that he used to sit under stood. There's now a tall pole with a liberty cap and a flag of stars and stripes. What is that? Then he sees the portrait, the painting at the heart of this. And this is the old signboard of King George, which is still there. But, quote, the red coat was changed for one of blue and buff. A sword was held in the hand instead of a scepter. The head was decorated with a cocked hat, and underneath was painted in large characters, General Washington. Same face, a new name on the placard. The entire revolution to Rip is a repainted sign. Then the mob. They come up to him, demand to know whether he's a Federal or a Democrat, which side he voted. He pleads, I'm a poor, quiet man, a native of the place, and loyal subject to the king, God bless him. And the crowd erupts, a Tory, a spy, a loyal subject of a king who no longer exists, standing in a republic that doesn't know who he was. There's a kind of vertigo, a kind of estrangement that is occurring. He's no longer a man who belongs to his own city, his own town, his own home. He looks around for a familiar face and he sees a young man who is, quote, a precise counterpart of himself. It's his son, also named Rip, and he comes apart, quote, I'm not myself, I'm somebody else. That's me yonder. No, that's somebody else got into my shoes and everything's changed and I'm changed and I can't tell what's my name or who I am. Then comes the rescue, luckily, which is his grown daughter, Judith, recognizes him and takes him in, just like the Peter story, right? The old villagers confirm the tale. He learns the truth. 20 years, a revolution, a new country. That's what happened. There's a kind of comedic relief here. Dame Van Winkle has died in a fit of temper at a peddler. Rip is quietly and comically glad at this. The sacred sleep of the ancients ends here in a widower's relief, free of his wife and his king in the same afternoon. And then the ending of the story. And this is a very short story. It's only a few pages. He takes his old place, quote, on the bench at the inn door and becomes the town's living chronicle of the old times before the war. The man who slept through history becomes its only surviving witness. He becomes a part of history. And remember, this is supposedly taken from the papers of old Diedrich Knickerbocker. So what Irving is doing is giving a new nation, not laws, but legends, folklore. And folklore doesn't live on just the plot. There's a spine of the plot that's very simple. A man goes up into the mountains, or he goes into the mountains. He meets some magical creatures. He comes down to a changed world 20 years later after having gone through a 20-year sleep. Irving does this with the Headless Horseman, with Ichabod Crane, Rip, all, types that become common property within America, but they serve as this American folklore because we don't have an American folklore yet. It has to be invented, but it's invented in a very conscious way, unlike any other folklore in the history of the world. This really gets to the core of what literature, one of the core things that literature does for us, which is it hands us models of souls to emulate at different stages of our lives or throughout our lives. Rip is one of the first homegrown American heroes or characters, the gentle, generous, unambitious everyman. Not a model to emulate necessarily wholeheartedly, but a mirror Americans recognize themselves in constantly. And if you've ever talked to a foreigner who comes to America, they will often mention Americans are actually more gentle, generous, kind-hearted, helpful than any other peoples they've ever met. So this goes to the broader significance of this story and why I think this is such a significant story worth reading even in 2026, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever, 30s. The question is, why did Rip's sleep become a household name, but not any other story like this? Not Peter Klaus, not the Seven Sleepers. And it's partly because America is the sleeper country. It's the sleeper's country. This is a story that's very American, very uniquely American. So it picks up and takes off in a way that Peter Klaus, even in Europe, which is popular in Europe, but not in the same way that Rip Van Winkle is. The one place where walking into an unrecognizable world isn't an extraordinary event, it's ordinary to do this. The deeper point about what change means. This is a very broad topic, but I'm going to boil it down very quickly. Change is a constant. Every culture, every country has talked about change. There's different ways of looking at history. One I don't approve of fully, but I think there's some interesting insights here, is a kind of Marx Hegel's view of history as a kind of progression, that there has to be change. In fact, they did not even think that, quote, Asiatic mode of production was actually an empire, was actually a historical event. So they did not see Asia as even having a history, because it's a cycle of things that just keep occurring over and over again without much forward progression. So they were much more about forward progression. I don't like their theories and their conclusions in any way, but there is something to this idea that history in particular, particularly in the West, is a kind of progressive movement. Now, sometimes it goes backwards, but there are big moments that shape the next generation and are built upon to something brand new. Now, again, this is a very Eurocentric view for sure, but it's worth thinking about. And I think that's part of what is happening with Rip Van Winkle. History is not merely the capturing of the passage of time. It's the creation of new forms, a new way to tell stories in Irving's case, but it can be a new way to write, a new kind of law. Those kinds of things are the progression of history, a new way to make law. So you start off as, primitive people, and then you come up with a way to tell stories together. You form those stories, then you put those stories into law forms that you can write. Those are progressions. And then you keep going. You create a theater, and then the theater is where everyone gets their understanding and connection of the country that they're living in. So there's this progresses over time. There's technological progression, social progression. There's the Magna Carta, the Declaration of Independence, and so on and so forth. And no country has generated new forms of social change and technological change at America's pace, not even close. A new form of government, a written constitution, a federal republic, power split and checked on purpose, a new way to make laws, popular sovereignty, quote, we the people, built-in machine for amending the rules in the way that we have it, a new kind of court system with judicial review and a bench that could strike down legislator in the ways it does, building on the past where America came from, but building new things. And they change very dramatically. There's even new forms of storytelling that America invents, like the short story. This exists in the past, but America really invents and builds this in a unique way. And think about how the technological change creates social change. Just imagine, being born in 1890. You would have, as a child, rode a horse and buggy to a vaudeville tent where you'd see jugglers and people being silly when you were maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. Before you die, if you live to, let's say, 80, you would have watched the moon landing on a television in your own room. Think about this for a moment. There was somebody born in 1890 who rode horse and buggies to go see some local entertainment outside their rural farm. And in 1969, they likely had a television in their living room, and they were watching, as an old person, they were watching the moon landing. That's a single human life, that amount of change. The first powered flight is in 1903, and the moon landing in 1969. That's 66 years from the dunes just barely hovering to the lunar surface, right? There's almost no cars in 1900, and there are jets, not just planes, but jets within 40 years. And that changes how you could travel. That changes everything. It's just the social and economic and technological changes in America are just unprecedented. And that's Irving sensed that in 1819, before the railroads, before these major technological changes. He noticed that this kind of 20-year incremental change was dramatic in America in a way that it wasn't in other places. That to be an American is to risk waking up a stranger in your own town, because the town will not hold still. The German goatherd woke to an aged village, but Rip woke to a whole new nation. That difference is the whole American experience. Rip Van Winkle is every American who ever stood in the town they grew up in and didn't recognize it. We are all always coming down the mountain, blinking at a flag we don't know, a portrait repainted while we slept. Irving's gift was to a brand new country was the building of this simple folkloric hero and a mirror to the human American experience. I've experienced this when I was in my early 30s. I rode a motorcycle down to my old house where I lived, and it was a very surreal experience because all the houses were basically there. A lot of them were painted differently. There was someone new living in the house that I grew up in. I went to local places. A lot of them were gone. But then I took a ride. It was summer. I took a ride to the old elementary and junior high and high school that I went to in California. And it's like, oh man, this all bringing back memories. But everything around had changed. The people had changed. I grew up in an area that was very diverse, and it became way more diverse over the time that I left. It was actually nicknamed the Little Kabul because there had been a whole bunch of people from Afghanistan that went there, but all kinds of people from all over Asia and areas around there also moved there. So it's just a whole new world, which was really fascinating to see. I went to go see local events, and I went to see my house. And there was a tree that I planted that my parents planted when I was born in our front yard, and it was still there. But then I went back. This is so crazy. I went back a few weeks later, just kind of riding around because I was living not far away. And they tore that tree down. And it was such a weird thing. Like, of all the time to tear it down, they tore it down there. But that's the American experience, is that everything is changing all the time. The technological change, 2005 to 2025, has changed everything about the world in so many different ways. And that's the Rip Van Winkle story. Join me at the Literary Canon Club. Come read some of these stories, explore them. We're going to read a movie. We're going to watch a movie, listen to a poem, and read together, or read and discuss a couple of short stories, or sometimes just one short story. So join Literary Canon Club and have a good time.